Tonight we're wandering through a dreamy English garden at twilight. The air is cool, the sky is sliding into a dusky lavender, and ahead of you, partially hidden behind a veil of ivy, is a crumbling stone tower. Or at least, it looks like a crumbling stone tower. You hear a distant owl, a soft crunch of gravel under your boots, and maybe a ghost rustling in the hedges? Okay, maybe not, but you never know with these Victorians. You squint up at the cracked archway. Is this centuries old? Roman? Medieval? You step closer, trace your fingers along the weathered surface only to find it suspiciously smooth in places. Wait a minute, was this built to look old? Welcome to the world of Victorian garden ruins, where nothing is as it appears, and everything is designed to make you feel something. Melancholy, or nostalgia, and maybe a little disoriented. These ruins aren't leftovers from ancient civilizations. They're handcrafted, fake, theatrical, and utterly obsessed with the past. You probably won't survive this trip without questioning the entire concept of authenticity. But it's okay. We'll do it together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far this sleepy garden stroll travels. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you need to know, this whole fake ruin in a garden thing isn't just a Victorian quirk. It goes deeper, further back. But the Victorians took it to another level. You're standing in a world where moss is hand-placed for drama, broken columns are stacked with precision, and crumbling towers are carefully engineered to look like they've barely survived a siege. But spoiler, the siege was probably an afternoon tea party. In the early 1800s, England was transforming. Industrialization was buzzing forward with new machines, dirty cities, and relentless progress. But in the middle of all that, people, especially the wealthy, started looking backward. Not just back a few decades, but way back. Think medieval castles, Roman temples, ancient ruins covered in ivy. All those images from childhood fairy tales and epic poems. They wanted them, in real life, in their gardens. And so, as you continue walking past what looks like a collapsed abbey wall, you're actually stepping into the middle of an aesthetic movement. This was no accident. The ruined look, fragmented stone, vines, shattered staircases, was all planned. Wealthy landowners hired architects to build these ruins from scratch. They were called follies, structures meant to be decorative, not functional, and often eccentric. And if you're wondering why someone would spend a fortune to build a broken tower that does nothing, no storage, no living space, no function whatsoever, you're starting to get the vibe. This was art. This was mood. This was aesthetic before Instagram was even a gleam in the internet's eye. The trick was in the details. Some ruins were designed to mimic ancient Roman baths, complete with fake inscriptions and cracked marble. Others looked like old monasteries, windows punched out, corners fallen away as if bombarded by time. But again, no monks ever lived here. The walls were never whole. They were built to be broken. Now, while the upper crust was building these mini-disasters in their backyards, the general public was both charmed and confused. One contemporary critic joked that wealthy estate owners were so eager to mourn that which never was. Kind of like buying pre-ripped jeans for hundreds of pounds, same vibe. Some Victorians wanted you to believe they lived among ancient things, as if history itself had made a pit stop on their lawn. You circle around a half-collapsed wall that reveals a faux stairway, stopping mid-air. That's not poor construction. That's intentional. A theatrical freeze frame, caught in fake decay. Why? Because ruins, the Victorians believed, evoked emotion. The more crumbled and forgotten something looked, the more beautiful and moving it became. You feel it, don't you? That quiet melancholy, That gentle ache for something just out of reach. Historians still argue whether this obsession was escapism or nostalgia, or maybe a subconscious reaction to how fast their modern world was changing. But whatever the cause, the result is right in front of you. Broken perfection, decayed elegance, the romance of rot. There's also a darker edge to all this. Death was never far from Victorian minds. This was a generation that romanticized grief, idolized mourning, and built entire industries around funerals. A fake ruin in a garden wasn't just aesthetic, it was a memento mori. A little whisper from the bushes, remember, you too will crumble one day. Sleep tight, right? Quirky fact, some aristocrats went as far as commissioning personal ruins. Like a broken mausoleum with their name already carved in, just sitting in the backyard while they were still alive. Imagine sipping tea while gazing out the window at your own pre-ruined tomb. That's a vibe. A weird one, but a vibe. And yet, despite the strangeness, there's something undeniably magical about it. You pass through a stone arch with no building attached, its sole purpose being to frame the horizon just so. The Victorians didn't just want nature, they wanted to curate nature, control it, make it behave like a painting. Every bush trimmed, every rock placed, every ruin designed to stir your soul. Of course, this whole thing also had a massive side of showing off. You didn't build a faux ruin because it was practical. You built it because you could. Because you had the land, the money, the connections. Owning a fake Roman ruin was like wearing a Rolex made of antique marble. It screamed education, culture, and that elusive quality the Victorians loved to flaunt, taste. And so, as twilight deepens and the birds settle down for the night, you're left walking through a carefully crumbled fantasy. The moss, planted. The cracks, sculpted. The decay, a perfect illusion. But it feels real, doesn't it? That's the trick. That's the spell. Welcome to the age of beautiful fakes. The moon climbs a little higher now, casting a silver glaze over the stones at your feet. You follow a winding path between hedges, ducking beneath an overgrown rose arch, and there peeking through mist and moonlight is another ruin. This one's a turret, deliberately cracked along the top like someone took a bite out of it. Nearby, a broken stone bench invites you to sit and think. That's the whole point. These places weren't just pretty, they were philosophical. The Victorians weren't just building ruins because they liked how they looked. They were absolutely enchanted by what ruins meant. To them, decay wasn't failure, it was beauty. And not just beauty, but poetry. There was something terribly romantic about seeing time gnaw away at stone, watching ivy reclaim walls like slow-motion revenge. It stirred their souls. Made them sigh. Made them write extremely long, emotional journal entries in very tight cursive. This emotional pull is what made the ruin craze more than a fad. The elite, the artists, the thinkers, they saw ruins as symbols of transience, of glory lost to time. If you stood beneath a crumbling archway and felt a lump in your throat, well, congratulations. You were cultured. Bonus points if you clutched a book of Wordsworth while doing it. The Victorians had inherited a deep fascination with the ancient world from earlier generations. The 18th century had already seen the start of the cult of melancholy and the rise of the picturesque. We'll get there soon. But by the 19th century, it had blossomed into something even more layered and, let's be honest, a little theatrical. Victorians were into feelings, but only in a dramatic, slow piano music kind of way. So when they built fake ruins, they weren't just replicating architecture, they were creating emotional landscapes. A broken temple on a foggy hill wasn't just stone and shrubbery, it was a story. A reminder of the fall of empires. The sadness of time. The way everything, no matter how grand, eventually crumbles. Cue the sad violin. But of course, not everyone saw it that way. Some people, especially visitors from abroad, walked into these gardens and went, "Wait, this is fake." And yes, they were often confused. Because the Victorians were excellent at aging things artificially. Builders used clever tricks, acid washes to make new stone look old, fake weathering techniques, even intentionally breaking parts of a newly built tower to make it feel ancient. Kind of like scuffing up your new sneakers so they don't look too shiny. Mainstream fact: Queen Victoria herself was surrounded by faux ruins during her reign, particularly at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. Though she didn't personally champion them as much as her predecessors, the aesthetic was baked into the gardens of many royal estates. Even the wealthy middle class started copying the trend. And then there's the fringe. One bizarre tidbit is the tale of the ruins of Mow Cop, a faux-medieval tower built in Staffordshire. For years, people believed it was a genuine remnant of the 13th century. Tourists posed, artists painted, lovers swooned. Only much later did locals admit the tower was built in the 1750s, as a garden decoration. You laugh, but it fooled folks for decades. Some still argue over how fake it really is. That's the thing with ruins, they feel true, even when they aren't. And historians still argue whether this Victorian obsession was a sincere yearning for the past or a cleverly disguised ego trip wrapped in ivy. Was it cultural mourning or cultural cosplay? Let's talk about emotions again. The Victorians saw their gardens as places of reflection, and nothing invited reflection like decay. Imagine walking through perfect hedges and pristine fountains all day. It's lovely, yes, but it doesn't really tug at your heart. Now toss in a fake, crumbled chapel with arched windows open to the sky, a single crow sitting on the edge. Suddenly, you're writing poetry in your head and contemplating your mortality. It's theatrical, but it works. Ruins also served a very practical emotional function. They softened the landscape. In an age where everything was becoming sharper, cities, machines, schedules, a ruin was gentle, organic, unfinished in a beautiful way. It made the land feel timeless, slower, less manufactured, even when it was entirely manufactured. Of course, there was also a bit of Victorian guilt lurking beneath the ivy. The British Empire was, at this point, gobbling up cultures and lands at a rapid pace. But ruins reminded them of past civilizations that had risen and fallen. Rome, Greece, Egypt. Was it a warning? A comfort? A projection? Probably all three. Standing in a ruin, even a fake one, made you feel connected to something larger than yourself. Which brings us to an oddly delightful contradiction. These artificial ruins were deeply sincere. You might think of them as kitschy, even tacky, but they were meant to be honest expressions of longing and nostalgia. They weren't trying to fool anyone so much as transport you into history, into emotion, into a version of yourself who thinks deeply and sighs a lot. By now, your path has brought you to a little bridge. Beneath it, a dry stream bed curves through weeds, and just beyond, an open gateway with no gate, just two crumbling pillars that frame the night like a painting. Another staged moment. Another ruin built not to be, but to make you feel. You pause, lean on the bridge rail, and think, is this garden a place to escape the future or confront the past? Or is it just a playground for Victorian imaginations run gloriously wild? One last curiosity before we move on. There were guidebooks printed in the 1800s that listed famous fake ruins as tourist attractions, right alongside real castles. Some of them didn't even clarify which were authentic. You had to guess. And sometimes, the fake ones got more foot traffic than the genuine articles. Maybe because, like all good illusions, they were tailored to be exactly what people wanted to see. You step forward, crunching gravel underfoot. Somewhere nearby, a nightingale sings. Or is that someone playing a hidden flute? In a Victorian garden, you're never entirely sure. The gravel path forks. One trail leads deeper into shadow, toward what looks like the broken silhouette of a Roman temple. The other bends around a low stone wall and disappears behind a yew hedge. Naturally, you pick the spookier route, because if you're going to wander a Victorian landscape of illusions, you may as well commit. Up ahead, fluted columns rise like ribs from the earth. They're crooked, a few snapped clean in half. One leans dramatically, as if it's about to fall but never quite will. Between them, scattered blocks of carved stone and toppled statues suggest a once mighty structure brought low by centuries of war and weather. Of course, that's nonsense. This little ruin isn't even 200 years old. And it wasn't destroyed by time, it was assembled to look like time had its way with it. Welcome to the legacy of the Grand Tour. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it became tradition for wealthy young men, usually aristocrats or upper-class scholars, to embark on a long, often months or years-long, journey across continental Europe. Think of it as an elite gap year, but with way more marble and fewer hostels. Italy was a top destination, especially Rome, where travelers could marvel at the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and other relics of the ancient world. These young travelers soaked it all in: the architecture, the sculpture, the ruins. They filled sketchbooks with columns and cornices. Some even brought home actual chunks of ruins as souvenirs. Yes, looting ancient sites was horrifyingly common. Nothing says cultured like chiseling off a piece of antiquity to put on your mantle. And when they returned home, changed and oh so worldly, they wanted their estates to reflect what they had seen. They didn't just want books or artifacts, they wanted the feeling. The majesty of antiquity. The gravitas of ruin. So they built their own. At first, these classical imitations were subtle columns added to garden gates, Greco-Roman motifs in stone carvings. But soon, entire mock temples began to rise in British gardens, designed not to function but to impress. They were shrines to an imagined past, curated from memories and sketches. Some were nearly indistinguishable from the ruins of Pompeii, until you noticed they were conveniently located 10 minutes from a tea room. Historians still argue whether this impulse came from genuine admiration for ancient cultures or a desire to show off one's education and sophistication. Maybe both. Either way, by the time the Victorians arrived on the scene, the aesthetic had gone full theatrical. You crouch beside a toppled Corinthian capital, fingers tracing the faint scrollwork. It's smooth, not worn. Clean. Someone carved this recently, well, relatively. The trick is how it's arranged. Like a painting made of stone. One where ruin is carefully posed. One famous example is at Painshill Park in Surrey, where the estate's owner, Charles Hamilton, constructed a full-blown ruined abbey in the mid-1700s, decades before the Victorian era but hugely influential. The ruins were entirely fake, yet they were so convincing that Victorian visitors sometimes believed they were walking on holy ground. Hamilton had never seen a real ruined abbey in his life, but he'd read plenty of romantic poetry about them. Apparently, that was enough. The Grand Tour didn't just bring back aesthetics, it brought back ideas. A sense that civilization was cyclical, that empires rose and fell in grand, sweeping gestures. The young men who returned from their travels often spoke in melancholy tones about the glory of Rome, and how it reminded them to be humble. Well, humble in the way a man with 20 servants and a crumbling fake Parthenon can be. Quirky tidbit time: some travelers, so enchanted by the ancient world, began speaking in pseudo-Latin when showing guests around their gardens. This, my dear Lady Glastonbury, is the Via Ficta, and beyond it lies the Forum of Reflections. You'd nod politely, pretending not to notice that the Forum was clearly a goat shed painted to look like marble. There was also a trend, albeit a niche one, of hosting ruin picnics, where guests would dress in togas or medieval robes and dine inside these faux temples and towers. You'd drink wine, eat cheese, and lament the fall of civilizations while reclining against a plaster wall that was designed to look like it might fall over at any moment. Peak historical cosplay. But here's where it gets more interesting. These fake ruins weren't always just about ancient Rome or Greece. Sometimes, the grand tour inspired a mashup effect. A bit of Roman column here, a dash of Egyptian obelisk there, maybe some Gothic tracery thrown in for flavor. The result? A kind of world history smoothie, blended together and plopped into an English meadow. Authentic? Absolutely not. Atmospheric? Undeniably. As you pass through the faux temple's archway, you notice how the night plays tricks on your eyes. The ruin looks deeper than it is. Shadows pool in corners that don't exist. That's by design, too. The placement of windows, openings, and shattered walls wasn't random. It was crafted to catch the light, especially moonlight, in just the right way. To evoke stories, tragedies, maybe even a little supernatural chill. Which reminds you, many Victorians believed these ruins were haunted. Not because anything tragic had ever happened there, nothing ever had, but because ruins simply felt haunted. They were perfect vessels for imagination. A ghost doesn't care if the tower is real, as long as it has atmosphere. So as you walk, the connection between past and present begins to blur. Are you in 1845 or 1345? Are you wandering a Roman forum or an English sheep field with some very ambitious landscaping? The Victorians loved this uncertainty. They bathed in it. The whole goal was to create places that felt outside of time, timeless, in both directions. You stop before a weathered pedestal. The statue atop it has lost its head. On purpose, of course. A complete statue might be tacky, but a broken one? That's art. That's pathos. That's what a true connoisseur would expect. And deep down, even if you know it's all an illusion, you feel it too. You step beyond the shattered temple and into a field gone half wild with tall grass and thistles, where stone blocks lie scattered like a forgotten game of dice. The moonlight glints off their edges, and as you wind through them, something else becomes clear: these ruins weren't dropped here randomly. They were composed, like music. Which brings us to a particularly Victorian obsession, the picturesque. The idea didn't start with them. It bloomed in the late 18th century, rooted in a philosophy that tried to pin down what made a landscape beautiful, not just pleasant or neat, but soul-stirring. The picturesque sat between the tidy elegance of the beautiful and the terrifying awe of the sublime. If beautiful was a manicured lawn and sublime was a jagged mountain during a thunderstorm, the picturesque was a crumbling tower framed by ivy, viewed from a shady lane at golden hour. Yes, they actually argued about this. At length. Over tea. Philosophers like William Gilpin and artists like Claude Lorraine helped define it. They published sketchbooks and treatises showing readers exactly how to spot, or better yet, arrange the picturesque. A proper ruin, for instance, should have asymmetry. Bits missing. Nature creeping in. Bonus points for a reflective pool or distant hill. And if your garden didn't naturally include these things, well, build them. Bend the landscape to your vision. Import boulders. Plant trees at carefully irregular angles. Break your tower in just the right spot. It sounds silly, but the intent was surprisingly serious. The picturesque wasn't just about looks, it was about feeling. Mood. That delicate blend of nostalgia, awe, and just a hint of loneliness. This is where the Victorians truly embraced theatricality. By the 1800s, the picturesque had become practically a design manual. Landowners hired architects who specialized in faux ruins, not to hide them in forests, but to place them in view lines. These were sight lines deliberately plotted so that, at just the right spot on your walk, you'd turn a corner and gasp. Voila! A ruined tower framed perfectly by oak branches. A Gothic archway rising from mist. All completely artificial, and all completely effective. You spot one now across the field, a single crumbling wall with an arched window, nothing behind it but sky. It's like a stage set. And that's the point. You're not walking through a garden, you're walking through a story. Mainstream fact. One of the most famous picturesque estates in Britain is Stourhead. It's a full-blown drama in landscape form. Bridges, lakes, fake temples, grottos, and yes, purpose-built ruins. The garden tells a journey of the soul narrative modeled loosely on Virgil's Aeneid. Basically, you walk through classical scenes, feel very enlightened, and probably start quoting Latin if you've read enough Byron. Historians still argue whether the picturesque was genuine art or a kind of landscape micromanagement masquerading as philosophy. Was it about discovering beauty or controlling it to within an inch of its life? Because let's be honest, these gardens were curated more tightly than a teenager's Instagram grid. Here's a quirky one. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, of a Victorian lord who was so committed to the picturesque that he partially demolished a newly built tower because it looked too complete. Supposedly, he ordered workers to knock off a section of wall and throw moss on the stones. The whole thing had been standing for maybe 6 weeks. A speedrun of ancient decay. You can't help but smirk as you imagine the scene. A group of men in waistcoats, sipping sherry, solemnly nodding as they watch their creation be ruined on purpose. Ah yes, much better, now it speaks to the soul. And yet, somehow, it does. The picturesque wasn't just for landowners, it filtered into popular art, poetry, even early photography. A ruined backdrop gave everything gravitas. Painters would travel across Britain looking for broken castles, shattered abbeys, anything with a bit of crumble. But when they couldn't find the perfect scene, they'd just stage one. It's the 19th century version of, let's drive out to that Instagram famous hill with the old truck parked just so. You step onto a low stone terrace now, the view opening up across a man-made pond. A reflection shimmers beneath a Gothic arch perched on the far side. There's no practical reason for the arch to be there. It doesn't lead to anything. But it catches your breath just the same. It's exactly where it needs to be. The thing is, while the picturesque was built on very specific design rules, its goal was to make you feel like you'd stumbled into something accidental. Something that had been there for centuries, untouched. That's the great paradox of it all, artificial accidents. Staged spontaneity. Like someone messing up their hair on purpose to look effortlessly cool. But perhaps the most Victorian twist in this whole movement was the emotional layering. A ruin wasn't just decorative, it was a conversation between nature and civilization. A visual haiku about time, fragility, and the human condition. The ruin used to be something, and now it isn't, but it's still here, quietly haunting the present. And in that way, these fake ruins became something real. Not in age or origin, but in meaning. People proposed marriage under those archways. Mourned loved ones beside those fallen columns. Wrote letters, read poetry, took long, pensive walks in rain-drenched cloaks. And all of that memory, that living, sank into the stone, real or not. There's one more detail here. The picturesque was very class-based. Only the rich had the land, the money, and the time to commission fake ruins. Working-class folks might admire them, but they didn't build them. At least not in their own backyards. Which made these ruins symbols of privilege, even while pretending to be humble. Still, it's hard to deny the magic of it. You pause again, listening to the way the wind moves through the arch. Just a breath. Like something ancient remembering you. Or maybe it's just the trick of good design. Either way, it works. You follow the gravel path as it curves behind a low rise, where the tree line thickens and the ground dips into a shallow hollow. It's quieter here, more secluded. The kind of place where your boots sink slightly into damp earth, and where the moonlight filters through gnarled branches like smoke. That's when you see it, a crumbling tower rising out of the mist, cloaked in ivy, leaning slightly as if it's tired of standing. A classic folly. That's what these structures were often called, follies. Not because they were silly, though, let's be honest, some of them definitely were, but because they were ornamental buildings serving no practical function. They existed purely to be looked at, admired, and contemplated. Their purpose was their presence. And Victorian Britain loved them. If you lived in the 19th century and had a bit of land, and even more ego, chances are you dreamed of a folly or two. Not just ruins, but exotic towers, faux cottages, fake medieval keeps, mock hermitages. Want a Chinese pagoda in your garden? Go for it. A pretend Saxon stronghold? Why not? The Victorian attitude was basically, if you can imagine it, build it, and then pretend it's been decaying nobly for centuries. These follies weren't just randomly scattered across Britain's countryside, they were designed into estate landscapes as part of a broader trend of garden drama. You'd walk along a path, and suddenly the trees would open to reveal a turreted ruin on a distant hilltop. Or a half-sunken arch rising from reeds beside a lake. Each was a kind of punctuation in the story of the estate. Historians still argue whether these follies were mainly artistic expressions or elaborate status symbols disguised as poetic gestures. Because while they might suggest humility and reverence for the past, they were also extremely expensive piles of stone pretending to be rubble. You draw closer to the ruin before you now. It's clearly staged. The broken stairway ends abruptly, and a chunk of wall has been left collapsed at a perfect angle. There's even a faux crack in the foundation that's just a carefully carved groove. It's a bit like those trendy restaurants that serve food on slabs of wood and call it rustic. The mess is intentional and very, very curated. And sometimes, these follies came with stories. Here's a delightfully weird tidbit. Some estate owners hired hermits, yes, actual people, to live in their follies and add atmosphere. These ornamental hermits were expected to dwell in the faux ruins or caves, grow long beards, wear rags, and emerge occasionally to look mysterious and wise. In exchange, they were given food, shelter, and a kind of eccentric celebrity status. One famous hermit gig only lasted 3 weeks because the guy got bored and went to the pub. Can't really blame him. The idea of a solitary figure meditating in a ruined chapel fit perfectly with Victorian ideals of reflection, melancholy, and deep spiritual vibes. Whether anyone actually felt more enlightened after a hermit sighting is debatable, but they certainly felt like they were part of something ancient and meaningful. Follies often leaned into specific themes. Some mimicked ancient Roman ruins, while others imitated medieval monasteries or crumbling castles. A few even tried to pass for prehistoric dolmens and faux druid circles meant to evoke a misty Celtic past. The Victorians loved their mythic timelines, and follies were like buttons they could press to summon the illusion of history. You circle the tower now, passing under a false archway with a missing keystone. The moss is suspiciously regular. Probably planted there. Still, it fools the eye. You get that satisfying little chill that only comes from standing in something that feels like the last whisper of a lost civilization, even if it was built during the same decade as the telegraph. Mainstream history gives us plenty of examples. Take the sham castle at Wimpole Hall in Cambridgeshire. Built in the 18th century, it was carefully ruined on purpose and later became a favourite among Victorian walkers who liked to pretend they were the last survivors of some noble lineage. Or the Gothic temple at Stowe, which was designed to look like a religious ruin but was actually built as a political statement about moral decay. Deep, right? Victorian architects even had manuals on how to build the perfect ruin. These included advice on which stones were the best, how to angle a wall for maximum moonlight, and how to arrange fake debris to look authentically tragic. Picture Pinterest boards, but with way more crumbling mortar and fewer throw pillows. There's also the curious matter of sound. Many follies were built in spots where the wind would catch and whistle through just so. Not by accident. The Victorians believed that ruins should sound haunted too. It completed the emotional illusion. Nothing like a ghostly moan across a valley to sell the idea that this tower once housed doomed lovers or a secret monastery wiped out by plague. And of course, every ruin needed a good backstory. These were usually invented wholesale. Your tower wasn't just a nice addition to the West Lawn, no, it was the remains of a forgotten chapel built by exiled monks, burned in a mysterious fire centuries ago. Entire family legends were spun around these structures, complete with made-up saints and tragic brides. One ruin in Yorkshire was supposedly the resting place of a knight who turned to stone after losing his beloved. Reality check: it was built in 1832. The stone knight was just a garden ornament from a catalogue. But that didn't matter. The stories gave the ruin weight, meaning. They turned the folly into something more than architecture. They made it into a memory even if no one had actually lived it. So as you stand now beneath this wind-worn tower, it's easy to see why people still build these things today. Ruins, real or fake, speak to a longing for permanence in the face of decay. They let you imagine yourself inside something larger than your own life. Something shaped by time, but also outside of it. The Victorians didn't just build ruins. They built dreams of ruins, carefully arranged, lovingly distressed, and framed like paintings. You can scoff at the theatricality, the indulgence, the sheer absurdity of building something only to make it look like it's falling apart, but then again, here you are. Gazing up at a broken tower in the moonlight, breath-catching, feeling that something stir in your chest. That's the power of a good folly. You leave the tower behind and make your way down a narrow path edged with wet ferns and rustling grasses. The air shifts, cooler now, with the faint scent of old stone and damp earth. Ahead, tucked between two ancient oaks, looms a lopsided gateway. Not a real one, mind you. No road passes through, no walls continue beyond it. It's just a gateway, to nothing. Yet it feels like an invitation all the same. Welcome to the strange Victorian habit of reclaiming ruins from the past, then giving them entirely new, often totally fabricated, meanings. It wasn't enough to build ruins from scratch. Sometimes, the Victorians hunted down real ancient fragments, Roman columns, medieval stonework, even entire cloisters, and transplanted them into their own gardens. They called it rescuing heritage. Today, we might call it creative relocation. Or, if we're being blunt, glorified looting with a poetic excuse. Mainstream history tells us this was all part of the wider 19th century obsession with antiquities. As Britain expanded its empire and archaeology became trendy, people became collectors of the past. And not just museums. Private estates hoarded artifacts the way modern billionaires hoard sports cars, except with more moss and dramatic lighting. Take Horace Walpole, the father of Gothic revival architecture. He filled his villa, Strawberry Hill, with bits of stained glass, medieval carvings, and ancient stone rescued from churches that had been unfortunately demolished. Preserved, he would say. Repurposed. A few historians still argue whether this was cultural reverence or a highbrow version of interior design theft. You cross under the false arch now. The lintel above is etched with worn script, but if you look closely, you'll spot the sharp chisel marks of recent carving made to look weathered. A modern relic dressed in old clothes. It gets even weirder. Some Victorians commissioned ruins to commemorate things that had never existed. A ruined Roman watchtower might be built to honor a family's supposed imperial ancestry, even if no such ancestor could be found in any actual records. A faux Saxon burial mound might mark a completely imaginary battlefield. It wasn't about historical accuracy. It was about personal mythology. And personal mythology was big business. You have to remember, this was a time when family lineage meant social capital. Tying your bloodline to ancient stone, even fake ancient stone, was a power move. It whispered, "We've been important for a very long time." Whether or not it was true, irrelevant. Quirky fact. There's a known case of a Victorian gentleman who built a ruined abbey in his garden, then wrote his own family history into its fake stone plaques. According to these inscriptions, his great-grandfather was a martyr, his uncle was a monk-turned-rebel, and he himself was the rightful heir to a line of long-forgotten abbots. Spoiler, none of it checked out. But it gave his estate tours a certain gravitas. You pause at a stone bench, deliberately cracked down the middle. A carved lion's head snarls from the moss, clearly imported from somewhere else. Probably Italy. Maybe Greece. That's another thread here, foreign ruins brought home like trophies. Victorians adored the exotic. Colonialism, for all its brutal reality, was draped in romantic narrative back home. Many elite Britons returned from India, Egypt, or Turkey with bits of broken columns, chunks of temple friezes, or statues snapped at the waist. These were set up in gardens not for educational purposes, but to evoke distant lands and imagined adventures. Imagine visiting your neighbor's estate and finding a miniature Egyptian ruin nestled between their rhododendrons. Or strolling through an English country garden only to come upon a broken arch reassembled from chunks of real Roman villas shipped over from Europe. It was a kind of imperial landscaping, a way to fold the world into one's own backyard. Historians still argue whether this kind of garden collecting was a celebration of history or a deeply uncomfortable expression of entitlement. After all, many of these fragments were taken with little regard for local heritage or, in many cases, outright stolen. But the Victorians rarely saw it that way. To them, they were rescuing lost civilizations from obscurity, giving broken pieces of the past new homes. It all felt terribly noble and refined, like finding an injured bird and building it a tiny palazzo. Still, it wasn't always glamorous. Some ruins didn't survive the journey. There's a record of a stately home receiving an entire Roman portico that promptly collapsed during unloading. The owner ordered the stones arranged as a new ruin, saying, "It looks more authentic this way." Honestly, you kind of admire the optimism. You reach a grove where several columns lie arranged in a casual scatter, like fallen chess pieces. They might be Greek, or replicas. It's hard to tell. That was another trick. If you couldn't afford the real thing, you simply commissioned a copy. Local craftsmen became experts in faking classical decay. They could sculpt erosion, simulate lichen, even color stone to resemble centuries of weathering. Aged patina, fresh from the studio. But here's where things get more philosophical. By placing these relics, real or fake, in domestic landscapes, Victorians turned ruins into something personal. No longer distant or disconnected, ruins became part of everyday life. You might take tea beside a Roman column, or read a novel beneath a Gothic arch. You might watch your children play hide-and-seek through a temple's broken walls. Suddenly, history wasn't out there. It was here. In your garden. In your story. And with that came a certain intimacy. These ruins weren't just monuments to the past. They were containers of present moments. The whispered proposals. The morning walks. The bored teenagers sneaking a pipe behind the faux Saxon mound. It's ironic, really. By faking history, the Victorians created spaces where real memories could bloom. Authentic emotions inside inauthentic frames. You step into a low alcove now, perhaps once a Roman bath repurposed into a fish pond. The stone is slick, the shadows long. You sit for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around you. And that's the strange paradox of all this. Ruins are powerful not because they're complete, but because they're incomplete. They leave space for stories, for feelings, for mystery. Real or not, they suggest a time before you, and after you. Something bigger than your to-do list. Something timeless. So maybe the Victorians knew what they were doing, after all. You rise slowly from the stone bench, stretching a little as you follow a path that threads between low hedges. The hush of twilight has deepened now, and the garden around you feels suspended in time, like a forgotten theatre stage waiting for actors to return. But there are no actors, only you, and the whisper of crickets. And just ahead, perched on the edge of a hill overlooking the valley, is something that stops you short. A broken rotunda. Or at least, something pretending to be. Its columns are deliberately misaligned. The dome above is half missing. You can see stars through the gaps. There's even a toppled urn beside it, artfully covered in lichen. It's as if the gods of antiquity had dropped their decor mid-move and never came back for it. But this isn't just some abandoned stage prop. This rotunda, like many Victorian follies, was crafted with a particular aesthetic ideal in mind. One that celebrated picturesque decay. To the Victorians, ruins weren't just architectural leftovers. They were emotional tools. They were supposed to make you feel something. And not just anything, something deep, melancholic, sublime. Here's where we enter the realm of the picturesque, a concept that shaped much of 18th and 19th century landscape design. Mainstream historical sources tell us that the picturesque was a way of seeing the world that valued irregularity, contrast, and roughness, basically the opposite of manicured perfection. A crumbling ruin framed by wild vines and uneven terrain. Picturesque. A gleaming palace with a symmetrical garden. Too neat. Too smug. So when you see this busted rotunda, you're looking at a carefully curated slice of visual emotion. A crafted composition designed to evoke a sense of loss, beauty, and timelessness all at once. And guess what? The Victorians had rules for this. There were entire manuals on how to compose the perfect picturesque ruin scene. Where to place the light source. What type of stone to use for the most evocative cracks. How far ivy should crawl up the columns before it became too much. One landscape designer even warned against over-ruining, making things so broken that the eye felt uncomfortable. Because remember, this was a performance of decay, not actual collapse. Historians still argue whether these aesthetics were driven by genuine emotional engagement or simply highbrow trend-chasing. Was it about feeling something true, or looking like someone who felt something true? Either way, the picturesque had fans. Big ones. One of the most influential figures in Victorian taste, John Ruskin, believed that ruins were sacred because they bore the mark of time. To him, decay was beautiful. It showed the struggle between human achievement and nature's reclamation. A slow conversation carved in stone. Very dramatic. Very on brand for the Victorians. But let's not pretend everyone was that philosophical. Some estate owners just wanted to impress guests. Picture this: a dinner party concludes, the host guides everyone outside by lantern light, and there it is, a ruined temple glowing in moonlight. Someone sighs theatrically. Someone else quotes Latin. A third person maybe just wonders where the dessert went. Either way, that ruin gets remembered. And that's the thing. These follies weren't just about solitude and self-reflection. They were also stage sets for Victorian social life. Proposals happened beneath broken arches. Portraits were painted with cracked walls in the background. Even duels, yes, duels, were sometimes staged beside ruins for extra drama. Nothing says I challenge you to pistols at dawn like a half-toppled Corinthian column as your backdrop. Here's a weird tidbit. There's a documented case of a man commissioning a faux ruin as a breakup gift. His explanation? To commemorate the end of love with something beautiful. Honestly, that's either heartbreakingly poetic or the most passive-aggressive landscaping choice ever made. As you walk up the hill and step into the rotunda, the wind picks up slightly. The view stretches for miles, rolling fields, shadowy woods, and the glimmer of a distant manor house. The stone under your feet is cold, pockmarked with the illusion of centuries. You run your hand along one of the columns and feel the intentional grooves where time has been faked, detail by painstaking detail. Here's where the Victorian genius really shows. They didn't just create ruins for others to look at. They created them so they could experience being part of a ruin. They imagined themselves as tragic heroes of lost ages, the final chapter in some epic, fictional tale. Standing here, it's easy to see why. The world feels older, quieter, more meaningful. Even if the dome above was assembled by masons just 30 years ago. The rotunda's broken symmetry leads your eye naturally to the horizon, a classic picturesque trick. The idea was to create a flow of vision, from ruin to tree to sky. It's like being inside a painting you didn't realize you were part of. You half expect a painter to appear behind you with a palette and mutter something about chiaroscuro. And let's not forget the sound design. Follies like this were often placed where the wind would echo or where birdsong carried clearly. The Victorians were obsessed with oral scenery, the emotional quality of what you heard in a landscape. So, a ruin wasn't just seen, it was felt, in the rustle of ivy, the trickle of nearby water, the distant hoot of an owl. You sit for a moment on a cracked pedestal, looking out into the distance. It's strange, isn't it? How a fake ruin can feel so real. Maybe more real than the pristine manor house behind it. Maybe because it's broken, imperfect, full of room for you to project your own story onto it. The Victorians understood something that still resonates today. The most powerful spaces aren't always the ones that shine, they're the ones that whisper. So whether it was about fashion, emotion, status, or all three at once, these picturesque ruins served a purpose. They made the viewer pause, feel something, pretend a little. And tonight, as the stars glint through the shattered dome above, you get the sense that maybe you're not pretending at all. You descend from the rotunda, following a winding path that dips into a shadowy dell. The trees grow closer here, their branches curling like fingers, and ahead, half buried beneath moss and fern, lies what looks like the shattered remains of a bridge. Or perhaps a chapel. It's hard to tell, because it never truly was anything at all. You've entered the world of folly as fiction, where ruins didn't just mimic history, they told stories. Entire narratives were written into stone, mortar, and ivy. And not real ones. Not even fake historical ones. Just made-up epics, designed for emotional effect. You crouch beside a broken stair that leads nowhere. A stone plaque lies askew, etched with a name that's unfamiliar, Sir Alden of Garthmore. Not a real knight. Not a real legend. But to the Victorian landowner who built this miniature ruined chapel, Sir Alden was the star of a tragic romance he'd invented himself, complete with betrayal, stormy nights, and a doomed wedding that never happened. Very Nicholas Sparks meets King Arthur, only with more stone and fewer happy endings. Mainstream historical accounts often skim over this practice, but it's a deeply fascinating quirk. Some Victorians didn't want to remember the past. They wanted to write it. Their gardens became open-air novels. Their ruins were chapter breaks. One estate owner in Derbyshire constructed a ruined castle wall complete with fake cannon damage and scorch marks, claiming it was the site of a fictional siege involving his ancient relatives. His guests would gasp as he told them about the defenders' last stand, the flaming arrows, the noble sacrifice. Not a single word was true, but the ruin gave it weight. Like a visual lie detector that somehow passed the test. Quirky fact. There was a minor craze in the 1840s for what were called melancholy ruins. These weren't just ruins, they were themed around loss. Widows' towers, broken love chapels, crumbled battlements, all built to evoke stories of heartbreak and longing. It became a kind of performance art in stone. Garden guests would stroll through a landscape where every ruin came with a tale. And if they teared up, even better. You step across a set of worn paving stones arranged like the shattered floor of a once grand hall. Overhead, vines dangle like curtain tassels, and the whole structure seems to whisper, "Tragedy happened here." And you almost believe it. Because here's the genius move: the Victorians didn't care if the stories were true. What mattered was that you felt something. The ruin was the medium, not the message. It didn't need historical accuracy, it needed mood, tone, narrative rhythm. The same way horror films don't need real ghosts to give you goosebumps. Historians still argue whether these fictional ruins were a symptom of the Romantic movement's emotional excess or a subtle form of satire, rich folks play-acting at sadness while servants raked leaves around them. Either way, they worked. These invented ruins gave people a space to feel, to pause, to play. And oh, they played. There's one documented estate where the family hosted ruin weekends, inviting guests to dress in medieval costume and enact soap opera-level drama among the false tombs and shattered spires. One weekend ended in 2 engagements, 1 broken friendship, and a small fire involving a wax torch and a velvet cloak. Honestly, you'd watch that Netflix show. But not all fictional ruins were theatrical. Some were introspective. Solitary towers symbolized inner struggle. Half-finished chapels represented questions of faith. A broken stair leading nowhere. The unknowable future. It was ruin as metaphor, and it got surprisingly personal. You round the corner now and find yourself staring at a jagged stone cross rising from a cluster of wildflowers. There's a stone coffin beside it, clearly never used, lid askew, filled with rainwater and rotting leaves. A frog stares at you from inside, as if to say, "Don't take this too seriously." Which, to be fair, the Victorians sometimes did. Still, there's something moving about it all. These weren't just playgrounds for the rich. They were experiments in emotional architecture. Ways of turning grief, longing, even existential dread into something tactile. Something walkable. Modern scholars refer to this as the narrative landscape, and some even suggest it was a kind of therapy before people had therapists. A way to externalize feelings they didn't have words for. You couldn't say, "I'm crushed by the weight of modernity," but you could build a broken arch and stand under it dramatically during light rain. You leave the stone cross behind, ducking under a hanging branch and stepping into a clearing where a collapsed gateway frames the setting moon. And once again, the illusion holds. You feel something. You're not sure what. But it sits low in your chest like the echo of a story you half remember from a dream. And that's the heart of it. The Victorians didn't need ruins to be real. They needed them to feel real. To anchor fantasy. To hold the weight of invented pasts and imagined sorrows. And in doing so, they left behind something strangely lasting, not historical fact, but emotional architecture. Ruins that lied to your brain, but spoke truth to your heart. And now, as the wind sighs through cracked stone and the night wraps tighter around the edges of the garden, you realize that not every ruin needs to be explained. Some are better left as whispers, half-stories, shadows cast by moonlight across broken dreams. You take one last look at the made-up chapel, its walls slanting like slurred words, and step onward deeper into the garden, deeper into the dream. Your footsteps crunch softly over gravel now, leading you toward what looks like a ruined watchtower perched at the far edge of the estate. The air has cooled, the kind of deep night stillness that makes you extra aware of every sound: an owl hooting, a branch snapping, your own breath. The tower rises out of the earth like a fossilized exclamation point. And here, you're about to brush up against one of the strangest paradoxes of Victorian ruin building: how new materials were used to create old decay. You run your fingers over the base of the tower. The stone here isn't ancient limestone or medieval granite. It's concrete. You give it a light knock. Yep. Hollow. Reinforced. Probably poured and sculpted with care to resemble 12th century rubble. A modern skeleton dressed up in antique rags. That's right, many Victorian fake ruins weren't built from old parts at all. They were new constructions made to look weathered. Clean-cut stones were intentionally chipped, scorched, and stained. Fresh brick was painted over with lichen-colored glaze. Carvings were made uneven. And some designers even employed accelerated aging techniques like planting fast-growing mosses and spraying diluted iron to mimic rust runoff. Mainstream historical records confirm that entire guilds of stonemasons specialized in this kind of make-believe craftsmanship. They weren't just builders, they were illusionists. And they took pride in it. One even boasted in a letter that his work had fooled a visiting antiquarian into tears. Honestly, that's some next-level cosplay. But why go through all the trouble? Because decay had value. Not monetary value, necessarily, but emotional and social capital. A ruin suggested legacy. It suggested continuity. It whispered, this land has stories older than your own. So naturally, Victorians who lacked actual ruins on their property, they just built them. From scratch. And yes, that includes the tower you're standing under now. Its crumbling steps lead upward in a spiral, each one subtly irregular, on purpose, of course. You start to climb, and with each step, you feel like you're rising through layers of fictional history. The wind pushes in through missing slats and artfully jagged holes. The illusion of age is total. It's like a haunted house designed by an archaeologist with a flair for drama. Now here's where things get even weirder. Some ruin designers did use real fragments of the past, but spliced them into fake structures. One famous example: a Victorian lord in Yorkshire bought pieces of an actual Roman villa, columns, marble tiles, even a bathtub, and embedded them into a completely fake ruin he'd built on a bluff above his garden. The result was a bizarre Frankenruin, 1 part real antiquity, 9 parts Victorian fantasy. It's the architectural equivalent of someone wearing grandma's necklace with a Halloween costume and insisting it's all authentic. And yet, it worked. Visitors were enthralled. Scholars took notes. And even today, people argue over which parts were genuine. Historians still debate whether this kind of collage construction was reverent recycling or just kitsch gone elite. There's another fun tidbit. One estate in Cornwall went so far as to bury their fake ruins in soil for 6 months before unveiling them, just to get that natural weathered look. They even paid local kids to kick the stonework and rub it with dirty hands. Authenticity, Victorian style. But the deeper question is this: why were the Victorians so obsessed with faking the past? The answer might lie in their relationship with time itself. Remember, this was an age of industrial revolution. Machines were roaring, trains were speeding, cities were ballooning. Time was speeding up. Change was constant. And in the face of that chaos, ruins offered a kind of anchor. A slow, crumbling antidote to the dizzying pace of modernity. Even if those ruins were brand new. Standing at the top of the tower now, you look out across the moonlit grounds. Other ruins dot the landscape below: pillars, broken arches, a sham obelisk. They shimmer in the dark like ancient ghosts. But you know better. These aren't ghosts. They're props. Romantic, well-meaning, beautifully crafted props. Yet somehow, that doesn't make them any less meaningful. Because the illusion still works. You still feel a hush of mystery. A sense of distance from your daily world. These fake ruins have done their job not by lying, but by inviting you to imagine. To slow down. To step sideways in time. At your feet, a plaque is bolted into the stone. It's weathered, but again, probably on purpose. You squint at the inscription. It reads, "Time ruins all, even ruin itself." Who wrote it? Who knows? Could be Victorian. Could be the gardener last week. But it lands, doesn't it? Because here's the paradox the Victorians leaned into: ruins are meant to fall apart. But what if you build them that way to begin with? Is that cheating the past? Or honoring it with a wink? Some scholars argue that Victorian fake ruins were deeply postmodern before postmodernism even existed. They played with authenticity, performance, memory. Others think it was just rich folks indulging in stone cosplay. But you're standing here in the middle of the night, surrounded by moonlight and concrete, and you're not sure it matters. Because this fake ruin feels real enough. You start your descent. The stones echo underfoot. As you reach the bottom, you look back once, just to see the tower one more time. Its silhouette is jagged against the sky, like a line from a forgotten poem. Real or not, it's yours, now. Part of your memory. Another echo in the night. And with that, you continue down the path, toward the next curve in the garden, where another story waits in crumbling disguise. Your feet follow the gravel path into a denser part of the garden, where trees arch overhead like cathedral vaults. The air thickens with damp earth and fallen leaves, and up ahead, through the soft sway of branches, you spot something strange. Not stone this time. Not wood, either. It's metal, glinting faintly beneath ivy, like a skeleton wearing jewelry. You've arrived at one of the garden's most peculiar fictions, the industrial ruin. Yep, Victorians didn't just romanticize medieval abbeys and Gothic towers. They also dabbled in ruins of their own era. Factories, furnaces, water wheels, only broken, weathered, rendered obsolete on purpose. Now, that probably sounds like the architectural equivalent of writing your own obituary. But this is the Victorians we're talking about. They had a flair for contradiction. The structure before you looks like an old mill. A broken wheel leans against a crumbled brick wall, and rust streaks the flaking iron frame. The windows are just gaps now, jagged like broken teeth, and vines crawl up the side as if nature herself is reclaiming it. You step closer. A sign sits half buried in moss, Ashwell Forge circa 1792. But the typeface? Suspiciously modern. You guessed it, it's fake. In a time when industrialization was speeding ahead at breakneck pace, some Victorians felt oddly nostalgic for the early days of steam and soot. So they built fake ruins of proto-industrial buildings to suggest a bygone age of industry, even though that age had barely passed. Sometimes, it hadn't even ended yet. It's like someone today building a crumbling ruin of an iPhone factory. Too soon? Maybe. But in Victorian terms, totally on brand. Mainstream historians often gloss over these industrial ruins in favor of the more picturesque Gothic examples. But they were very real, if ironically so. Some of the same designers who built medieval follies also created these decayed forges and smelters. The aesthetic was different, sure. More brick than stone. More iron than stained glass. But the goal? Still the same: evoke mood. Tell a story. Invite a certain emotional reaction. And that reaction was often one of melancholy admiration. You stand inside the remains of a casting room. The floor is lined with soot-blackened cobbles, deliberately stained. A metal mold lies on its side, rusted solid. A mock chimney towers above you, cracked, crooked, and filled with carefully arranged bird nests. You can tell this place never made a single piece of iron, but it feels like it did. It hums with a kind of imaginary labor. And here's your quirky fact of the night. Some landowners held iron ruin parties where guests would tour these fake industrial skeletons in top hats and gowns while sipping lemonade. There'd be readings of faux factory journals. Dear Diary, we cast 12 gears and a button today. Tragic. And even mock accidents. One estate used red paint and chicken feathers for effect. All in good fun, of course. Just light-hearted mourning for a history that hadn't actually ended yet. Historians still argue whether these fake industrial ruins were meant as homage to a heroic age of labor or subtle critiques of modernity. Were the Victorians genuinely honoring the past? Or were they gently mocking it, putting a frame around the smoke and grime and saying, "Look how far we've come"? You bend to examine a rusted gear embedded in the wall. It's fused into the brickwork, half melted except it's not. On closer inspection, it's cast resin, carefully painted to look like rusted metal. You smile. Another trick. Another layer of fiction. The Victorians just couldn't help themselves. They weren't just rewriting medieval history, they were pre-writing their own. Cementing their era into a fake memory before the real one had even cooled. One scholar calls this anticipatory nostalgia, the strange Victorian tendency to mourn things before they were gone. Steam trains, already being romanticized before the paint dried on the last sleeper car. Coal furnaces, given faux gravestones in garden paths. And here, in this sleepy patch of land, you're standing in the echo chamber of that impulse. A place where the present was already old, already falling apart, already a story. You pass beneath a steel arch, curved and crumbling, leading into what looks like the fake shell of a machine room. Inside, arranged just so, lie mock pistons, broken cogs, and coils of rope and wire. The illusion is artful, almost tender, and somehow, it makes you think about your own time. The things we call modern. The things we'll someday fake for effect. A ruin of a Wi-Fi router. A crumbling door labeled Metaverse Control Room. The idea is both ridiculous and not. Because ruins aren't just about the past. They're about perception. They're about slowing down time, catching it mid-collapse, and saying, this meant something. Even if what it meant changes depending on who's looking. You step out of the fake forge and onto a low bridge made of oxidized metal beams. They groan slightly underfoot, by design of course. Below, a shallow stream glimmers in the moonlight, framed by mossy brick channels. The whole scene is a work of quiet artifice. And yet, your breath catches. Because even though it's fake, it's oddly beautiful. And maybe that's the whole point. The Victorians weren't trying to fool you. Not really. They were inviting you to join the performance. To suspend disbelief, just long enough to feel something. To admire not just the ruins of the past, but the way people choose to remember it. You reach the far side of the bridge, where a path curves up into darker woods. Behind you, the fake forge glows softly in the moonlight, like a relic from a world that never was, but might have been. And with one last look, you step forward, into the next memory. The path grows narrower now, winding through tall hedges and thorny undergrowth, like it doesn't want to be followed. You brush aside some vines, your fingertips grazing wet leaves, and there it is, half buried in green, surrounded by silence, and looking every bit like the ghost of a story. A broken mausoleum. Or rather, a pretend broken mausoleum. You approach slowly. The stone is pale and speckled, worn down at the corners just enough to whisper age. Ivy coils across the base like nature's punctuation, and one of the doors, rusty, askew, has been artfully propped half open. The interior is shadowy and cool, and for a moment, you hesitate. There's something about fake tombs that feels even eerier than real ones. Like they want you to look inside. And of course you do. Because tonight, you're diving into one of the more morbid fascinations of the Victorian era, artificial funerary ruins. If you thought follies were about fantasy, wait until you hear how deep the Victorians went with death. These weren't real tombs. No one was buried inside. But they looked the part. Crumbling crypts, shattered sarcophagi, broken angel statues with artfully missing wings, it was all designed to evoke sorrow, remembrance, and a touch of delicious dread. Inside the mausoleum, a beam of moonlight cuts across the floor, landing on a fake slab bearing an equally fake Latin inscription. You can't help but chuckle. It's not even grammatically correct. Just someone's best stab at sounding epic. Mortuus est in aeternum, and then a bit that loosely translates to here lies the dude who mattered. Classic. This whole structure is a performance. And yet, it feels meaningful. Quiet. Still. The kind of place that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. Mainstream history tells us the Victorians had an intense relationship with death. Queen Victoria herself practically branded mourning after Prince Albert died, black dresses, jet jewelry, memento mori art. Graveyards became places of weekend strolls. Death was both feared and aestheticized. It was the Gothic Instagram filter of its time. So of course, they wanted to bring that aesthetic home. And when they couldn't bury an actual noble ancestor on their land, they did the next best thing. Build a pretend crypt. And here's the thing, they weren't always trying to be spooky. Often, these funerary follies were meant to express eternal love, melancholy, or even satire. One eccentric duke built a fake ruined tomb for his beloved dog, complete with weeping cherub statues and a stained glass window showing the hound ascending to heaven on a cloud. Talk about going full send. Quirky fact of the night. A particularly theatrical nobleman near Norfolk had his fake tomb engraved with the names of fictional descendants. He created a whole imaginary lineage stretching back to the Crusades, complete with coats of arms and a stone fresco of a battle he clearly made up. Visitors reportedly found it very moving, which is a polite Victorian way of saying, "Sure, dude." Historians still argue whether these fake tombs were sincere expressions of grief or clever jabs at the performative nature of mourning. Was it emotional camouflage or aristocratic stand-up comedy? Either way, the effect worked. Visitors strolling through the grounds would pause, bow their heads, maybe whisper a line of poetry. Mourning, even fake mourning, had its rituals. You move deeper into the structure. A broken stained glass window above throws fractured colors on the walls, reds, greens, dull blues. It's been arranged to catch the light this way at night, as if mourning itself were an art installation. You sit on a stone bench that probably never existed in any real chapel but feels sacred anyway. And now your thoughts drift to something stranger, empty graves. Some Victorian estates featured mock graveyards, dozens of headstones, all bearing poetic or tragic inscriptions. Lost at sea. Taken too soon. Sleep, gentle spirit. But no bodies. Just stone poetry. It's theatrical grief, unanchored by reality. And yet, people would leave flowers. Stand in silence. Some even reported feeling watched. You reach down and brush some moss off a nearby plaque. The name reads Clara de Montfort, 1789 to 1813. Sounds real. Probably isn't. A Google search would probably reveal Clara never existed. But in this moment, you believe in her. Just a little. The Victorians knew exactly what they were doing. They were building emotional set pieces. And here's the twist, they wanted you to feel something. Not just admiration or beauty, but longing, regret, mortality, the full symphony of loss. Whether it was real or not didn't matter. And maybe that's the most Victorian trait of all, believing that performance could become truth, if done with enough sincerity. You step outside again. The wind brushes your cheek like a whisper, and behind you, the fake mausoleum fades back into shadow. Around it, the garden stretches out, peppered with more architectural whispers. You pass a cluster of toppled columns, another favorite ruin motif, and start walking toward a grove in the distance. As you go, you remember a line from a poet of the era. We dress our sorrows in stone that they may outlast us. Maybe these ruins were just emotional costumes. Maybe they were actual prayers, carved into fictions. Either way, they've done their job. You feel quieter now. Not sad, exactly, just a little softer around the edges. As if part of you is already turning into memory. You leave the grove behind, your steps lighter now, though the ground is uneven beneath you. The fake tombs are fading from view, their mournful charm lingering like the last lines of a lullaby. Ahead, the path widens again, flanked by carefully trimmed hedges, and beyond them, rising like the skeleton of some long-lost cathedral, stands what looks like a half-built temple. Only, that's not quite right. It's not half-built. It's half-destroyed. Columns lean at odd angles, a few shattered steps lead to nowhere, and vines dangle from an open ceiling like forgotten curtains. You step closer. A bird flutters out from behind a carved stone arch, startling you just a little. This was never a church. Never a real temple, either. What you're looking at is something far more ambitious, a classical ruin folly, drawn from ancient Greece or Rome, reimagined by Victorian hands. And this part of your journey? It's where the Victorians go full cosplay. The classical ruin became a must-have for many wealthy estates, especially after the grand tour craze took hold. Aristocrats would trot around Europe, snapping sketches of the Parthenon, ogling columns in Pompeii, and collecting little marble souvenirs with the same enthusiasm you might apply to keychains from Disneyland. Then they'd come home and build their own ruins. And not full temples, mind you. No, that would be too simple. They wanted the drama of decay. Broken archways. Cracked statues. Fallen pediments. These were the Pinterest boards of Victorian garden design, carefully curated, tastefully distressed. Mainstream history tells us that this fascination came from a romantic obsession with antiquity. The Victorians idolized the Greeks and Romans for their philosophy, their aesthetics, their ruins that somehow managed to look gorgeous even in disrepair. A broken column wasn't a failure, it was a mood. The folly before you stands tall, even in its artificial ruin. You reach out to touch a fluted column, your fingers brushing against a fake chip in the stone. The texture's surprisingly realistic, textured plaster over a brick core, aged with layers of tinted lime wash. Someone really cared about this illusion. And now your quirky fact: a wealthy viscount once commissioned a full-scale replica of the Temple of Hephaestus, but intentionally built it at a post-earthquake angle. The scaffolding was knocked over, fake rubble piled at the base, and broken statuary accidentally scattered nearby. He even hired a local drama troupe to act as weeping Athenians during garden parties. Imagine sipping tea while someone in a toga screams "Oh, cruel fate" next to a shrubbery. Delightfully bonkers. Historians still argue whether these classical ruins were serious tributes to ancient greatness or just another level of aristocratic cosplay. Were the Victorians trying to align themselves with the wisdom of the ancients, or were they just playing house with marble? You wander through a crumbled portico. The steps beneath you creak slightly, not from age, but from being made of hollow wood under a stone veneer. Another illusion. But one that holds. In your ears, the air almost seems to hum with the echoes of imagined philosophy debates, staged tragedies, and long-lost myths. There's something about these ruins that feels timeless, maybe because they were meant to. Unlike the medieval follies, which leaned into ghost stories and dark romance, these classical ruins aimed for gravitas. Even in collapse, they suggested power. Civilization. Continuity. You pause in the center of what would have been the atrium. Above you, the open roof frames the stars. Someone has even placed a fake sundial on the broken floor, its gnomon bent sideways like it gave up on keeping time. A nice touch. And then you spot it, a statue. Well, most of one. A bust with a chipped nose and cracked neck, perched on a mossy pedestal. Is it supposed to be Apollo? Or maybe Marcus Aurelius? The nameplate is worn out, on purpose, of course. The ambiguity adds to the charm. If you stare at it long enough, it could be anyone. Or no one. Just another marble ghost playing its part. You start to wonder what it says about a culture that prefers its temples ruined. Why not build whole ones? The answer might lie in the peculiar way the Victorians saw time not as a straight line, but as a great collapsing spiral. Progress was thrilling, yes, but also terrifying. With every new invention came the fear of forgetting something ancient, something noble. So they built these ruins as anchors. Symbols of ideals they felt slipping away: wisdom, virtue, permanence, and, of course, aesthetics. Nothing says I understand classical values like a fake statue of Socrates weeping next to your koi pond. You run a hand along the edge of a broken cornice. A spider skitters away into the crevice. The detail here is meticulous, cracks etched with chisels, corners filed down to suggest centuries of rain. The dedication to decay is oddly inspiring. You can almost imagine a team of stonemasons arguing over the most authentic way to simulate 500 years of erosion. And here's the kicker: some of these ruins actually became real ruins over time. Neglect, weather, and good old-fashioned moss did their work. What began as a fake-aged structure eventually became authentically old, like a method actor who stays in character too long and becomes the role. There's something weirdly poetic about that. You sit on a chunk of collapsed frieze, watching the wind shift leaves across the temple floor. Somewhere in the bushes, a night creature rustles. Maybe a fox. Maybe just the wind remembering something. This place feels suspended, like a thought someone forgot to finish. And just when you think the illusion might fade, the moon emerges again, casting perfect white lines across the broken columns, and suddenly, you don't care if it's fake or not. You're part of it now. A wanderer in a temple of make-believe, basking in the imaginary wisdom of ages. Because sometimes, the performance is enough. You leave the ruins behind, though they linger in your thoughts like the echo of a poem you can't quite finish. Your feet find a new path, narrow, gravelly, a little overgrown, and for a while, all you hear is the soft crunch of your steps and the rustling of dry leaves overhead. Then, ahead in the darkness, something strange flickers into view. A jagged silhouette. Stone rising in sharp verticals. Bits of ironwork. A structure that doesn't belong to any temple, castle, or tomb. You squint through the trees and suddenly realize what you're looking at. A crumbling bridge. Only, of course, it isn't actually crumbling. And it never really carried anyone across anything. It's a ruined bridge folly, and it's going nowhere. You step closer. Vines spill down like curtains. A piece of broken railing juts out at a strange angle, as if some storm once tore through and left everything twisted and dangerous. A fake lantern lies rusted on the edge, its glass cracked in a convincing spiderweb pattern. And yet the whole thing is solid beneath your feet, safe enough to cross. And that's exactly what the Victorians wanted. A moment of suspense. The thrill of peril. The drama of standing on something that shouldn't hold, but does. Mainstream historians note that ruined bridges became popular in the late 18th and 19th centuries as statements of romantic decay. Just like temples and tombs, they were symbols of what was lost, of time passing, of stories ending before they were supposed to. It's the architectural version of wistfully staring out a rainy window while violins play in the background. But here's a delightful quirk. Some of these bridges were never even connected to paths. They just stood alone, arcing over dry ground or decorative streams, broken in the middle, like monuments to missed connections. Visitors would stand beneath them and recite lines from Byron or Tennyson, or just sigh dramatically while their parasols fluttered in the breeze. There's a famous example at Painshill Park, in Surrey, a fake Gothic bridge with a collapsed arch that spans a shallow lake. It looks like something out of a disaster painting. People still photograph it today, half expecting ghostly monks to be lurking nearby. Spoiler, no monks. Just ducks. You lean on the side rail, looking down. Below is a gentle creek, probably added later for effect. The sound of the water echoes up, adding to the theatrical illusion. You imagine a nobleman walking here in 1835, hands clasped behind his back, sighing about the fate of empires. Or a noblewoman pretending to faint from melancholy, corset tight, eyeliner smudged by a single, tasteful tear. And now your quirky fact of the night. One estate owner actually built a series of fake broken bridges to symbolize the emotional toll of his failed marriage proposals. Each bridge bore the name of a woman who'd turned him down, and guests were invited to cross the threshold of heartbreak as part of the garden tour. Subtle? Not remotely. Memorable? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether these ruined bridges were about loss, or if they were meant to create literal and metaphorical points of tension in the landscape. Were they emblems of broken dreams, or clever ways to add vertical drama between the flower beds? As you walk across, the boards creak on purpose, of course. The whole thing has been constructed to sound fragile. The planks are spaced just far enough apart to make you notice your steps, just warped enough to feel old. It's not unsafe, but it feels like it could be. And that tension? That's the secret ingredient. Because remember, the Victorians weren't trying to fool anyone. No one truly believed these were ancient ruins. They were trying to make you feel like you'd wandered into a storybook. Or a memory. Or a dream. They wanted you to participate in the illusion. You pause at the midpoint, where the bridge dips slightly, a fake structural flaw that makes you grip the railing a little tighter. Below, the creek glints in the moonlight. The scene is so well staged it almost feels choreographed. And suddenly, you notice something else. On the far end of the bridge, carved into the stone where the railing meets the path, are tiny initials. FM, 1882. Followed by a single heart. Someone left a signature here, maybe a gardener, maybe a bored teenager with a chisel, maybe the original builder. It's not part of the plan, and that makes it oddly magical. A real memory, nestled inside a fake ruin. You keep walking. The bridge levels out and connects to a rocky path, where chunks of faux rubble line the trail, as if the collapse had scattered debris. It's so carefully careless, each stone placed exactly where an avalanche might have left it. Nature, scripted. And now, something almost mischievous. One particularly eccentric landowner built a ruined bridge entirely underground. A subterranean grotto, shaped like a shattered aqueduct, where guests had to crawl through a broken arch and emerge blinking into sunlight. The metaphor was unsubtle, a journey through darkness, despair, and damp moss, ending in redemption by picnic. He even served lemonade at the exit. Iconic. You step off the bridge and glance back. From this angle, it really does look like a fragment from another world. Like something time forgot. And somehow, the fact that it's pretend makes it even more compelling. Like a costume someone wore so well, they convinced you they were born in it. Maybe that's what all these ruined bridges are, in the end. Not crossings, but metaphors. For the gap between imagination and reality. For the beauty of things that almost were. You brush your hand along a vine-covered post, one last time, before turning away. The wind picks up, ruffling the leaves and tugging at your sleeve. The garden feels quieter now, as if it's waiting. Just ahead, the path splits again. One way leads deeper into the trees. The other heads toward a strange metallic glint in the moonlight, something sharp, modern, and out of place. And you can't help but wonder, what would a Victorian think of a ruin made of steel? The crunch of gravel gives way to firmer footing as you step toward that glint of metal, curiosity nudging you forward like a whisper in the dark. Trees thin. The air sharpens. And then, without warning, the foliage parts to reveal something distinctly Victorian, a ruin, yes, but not of stone or wood or plaster. Steel. Glass. Rivets. Girders. You blink. At first, it looks like the remnants of some abandoned factory, all skeletal frames and shattered panes. But then you realize, it's another folly. A modern ruin, born from the late Victorian obsession with industrial aesthetics. Yes, they went there. You step into what looks like the hollowed-out ribs of an airship hangar, its arched supports twisted artfully, vines looping through the framework like they've claimed it after some imagined catastrophe. Your boots clink softly on rusted iron flooring. Moss grows between rivet holes. A shattered skylight above lets moonlight spill across the floor like a quiet explosion. By the end of the 19th century, something strange had happened. The Victorians, once obsessed with ancient Rome and medieval towers, began turning their nostalgia machine inward. Their own present railroads, factories, steam engines started to feel monumental. And scary. And worth preserving. Or, better yet, simulating decay before it could happen for real. Historians believe this was part of a cultural reckoning. Britain was peaking, globally dominant, technologically unstoppable, and that made everyone nervous. What goes up must tumble into charming disrepair, preferably near the tea garden. So they began building ruins that reflected the future they feared. Collapsed observatories, empty greenhouses, the broken dreams of a steam-powered tomorrow. It was a different kind of drama. Less Greek tragedy, more post-apocalyptic preview. You pause under a rusted lattice, looking up at ivy-strewn girders that curl like vines in a Tim Burton sketch. One entire wall is missing, offering a panoramic view of the surrounding grove. Whether it was designed that way, or collapsed later as part of the aesthetic, hard to say. That ambiguity is part of the point. And here's your quirky nugget for the night. A London collector once commissioned a fake derelict telegraph station, complete with shattered Morse code machines and rusted wires, to mourn the death of wonder in the electric age. He reportedly hosted candlelit poetry readings inside, and made guests wear black velvet gloves so they wouldn't disturb the solemnity of the metal. You really have to admire that level of committed absurdity. Historians still argue whether these industrial ruins were cynical or sentimental. Were Victorians expressing anxiety about their mechanized future, or were they doing what they always did, turning everything, even their fears, into set pieces? You trail your hand across a row of oxidized beams. The rust rubs off on your fingertips like ochre dust. Above, the beams stretch across the sky like bones from a fallen mechanical beast. There's an eerie serenity here. The kind of silence that's only possible in a place designed to feel like after the end. You find what used to be a staircase, just the lower half remains, curling upward before stopping abruptly in midair. It leads to nowhere, and yet it's maybe the most poetic thing in here. You imagine an inventor once climbed it daily, perhaps with a pocket watch ticking and oil-stained gloves on his hands. You picture his office at the top, now gone, erased by fiction. And down near the base of a twisted pillar is something strange, a brass plaque, tarnished green, bolted to the floor. You kneel to read it. The inscription is simple. Future perfect tense. Completed 1897. You smile. It's a pun. Or a prophecy. Or both. There's something oddly hopeful about this place, for all its staged decay. Maybe because it's a ruin that looks forward, not back. A warning and a tribute. A whisper that even the greatest machines won't outrun the march of time or ivy. And yet, unlike the earlier ruins, temples, tombs, towers, this one feels more honest. Less wrapped in mythology. More concerned with what's actually at stake. The romantic ruins mourned imagined wars and ancient wisdom. These modern ruins, they mourn the potential of ideas that once seemed unstoppable. Progress turned ghost. You explore deeper, stepping carefully around a jagged frame that might have once held a pane of stained glass. There's a chair here, welded from iron scraps and scorched wood, placed in the center like a throne. You sit. The cold travels up your spine. And for a moment, you hear it, not literally, but vividly, the phantom hiss of steam, the clatter of typewriter keys, the murmur of engineers solving problems no one else yet understands. Then silence again. The only real sound now is the wind through the iron ribs, creating a soft, whistling harmony that somehow sounds like breathing. Like the ruin itself is alive. You close your eyes. The industrial age, like every age, was not immune to nostalgia. Even as they invented the future, Victorians sensed its fragility. So they wrapped it in ivy and built it a tomb ahead of schedule, just in case. You rise from the chair, brushing flakes of iron off your coat, and begin walking again. The path ahead leads out of the ruin, up a shallow hill dotted with lantern posts and sleepy hedges. The wind has settled. The stars are clear. And in the distance, you see something moving, slow, deliberate, heavy. A silhouette, large and animalistic. No, not a beast. An elephant. A stone one. Waiting for you in the moonlight. It takes a moment for your brain to catch up to your eyes. But yes, standing ahead, just past a row of half-dead rose bushes and a crooked iron gate, is a massive stone elephant. Moss creeps up its legs. Its trunk droops as if it's exhausted from centuries of ceremonial duties. And its hollow, dark eyes seem to watch you approach without blinking. This isn't a dream. This is Victorian garden design, peaking in strangeness. You circle the elephant slowly. It's enormous, almost 2 stories tall. You run a hand along its flank, half expecting it to be warm. But it's cold. Smooth. And clearly artificial. There's a seam running down its side, like a door once meant to be hidden. You laugh softly. Because of course. This isn't just a statue. It's a folly. A fake ruin. And this one was made to resemble the remains of a forgotten empire, with the noble beast as its last loyal guardian. Victorians had a particular fascination with the East, India, Egypt, Persia, all reshaped and reimagined through a foggy lens of Orientalism and imperial fantasy. It wasn't accurate, or even respectful. It was performative nostalgia for civilizations they barely understood, mashed up with their own anxieties about conquest, identity, and cultural decay. So what did they do with all that confusion? They built ruined elephants in their gardens. A real example still stands in Parc Monceau, in Paris, an 18th century stone elephant head looming above a faux temple pool. But the Victorians took the idea and ran with it. There were even a few grand estates in England where entire animal-shaped follies, rhinos, lions, even crocodiles, were commissioned as ruins of zoological monuments. Yes, zoological monuments. You can't make this up. You peer into a narrow opening near the elephant's back leg. It's just wide enough to crawl through. You hesitate, because crawling into a ruined pachyderm in the dead of night is a sentence that should probably never exist, but then you do it. Inside, the hollow chamber smells of stone dust and lavender oil, oddly enough. There's a curved bench molded into the inner wall, and up above, tiny holes pierce the stone like a star map. You sit, back resting against the cool curve of the belly, and let the weirdness settle in. This is where guests would have been led after long garden walks. A final surprise. A secret room in a fake ruin of a fake animal from a faraway land. They might sip tea here. Or smoke opium. Or read exotic poetry. Or, more likely, gossip and compare parasol patterns while pretending they were explorers. It's all so theatrical. So layered. You can't help but admire the commitment. And now for your fringe detail. One aristocratic couple in 1878 designed their entire garden around a mythical lost zoo, featuring only ruined animal statues. They even wrote a guidebook for visitors, pretending these were the remains of an extinct species of stone-dwelling beasts. The satire was obvious. But some tourists believed it and began sending letters to museums asking about Eliphas Antiquitas Decorus. Science was not amused. Historians still argue whether animal ruins were about satire or sincerity. Were these follies meant to poke fun at colonial ambition, or celebrate it under a tasteful coat of moss? Outside, wind rustles through high grass. You can hear the garden settling, softening into stillness. Maybe that's what the elephant is really for. Not as a statement, or even a joke, but as a quiet guardian of everything ridiculous and wonderful in the Victorian imagination. You emerge slowly, brushing off your sleeves. The moon is high now. The whole garden glows in silver tones. You look back at the elephant one last time, and for a second, it almost looks like it's walking away. Not crumbling. Not dead. Just slowly disappearing into the past. And maybe that's what all these ruins are doing, leaving you. Or inviting you to follow. The path ahead twists again, gently uphill, toward the last edge of the garden. You take one step, then another, your boots now softer against the grass. There's a hush to everything, as if the ruins are finally done whispering. A wrought iron arch appears ahead, tangled with white ivy, barely lit by a flickering lantern. As you pass beneath it, the wind shifts direction. The smell of tea roses. The creak of a weather vane. And here, at the end of the garden, a bench. Not broken. Not mossy. Just a bench. Waiting. You sit. And with that, you've crossed the last folly. This garden of fake ruins, of collapsing arches and haunted elephants and melodramatic tombs, has done its work. You've seen the ways the Victorians tried to cheat time, to stage beauty, to mourn things they never lost. And in doing so, maybe they gave you something real. A quiet place to sit. A moment to breathe. And the strange comfort of things falling apart beautifully. As you rest here, whether under blankets or tucked into some cocoon of pillows, the world of stone and shadow begins to slip away. The ruins grow distant, swallowed by vines. The wind softens, curling around corners like an old lullaby. And above you, stars begin to dim, not from clouds, but from calm. You feel the weight of all that imagined history, the laughter at fake funerals, the sighs on cracked bridges, the elephants carved from longing, and it settles gently into your chest. Not heavy, just present. That's the thing about ruins, real or not. They're quiet storytellers. They don't need to shout. They just stand there, letting the world age around them, letting your imagination do the rest. And as your eyelids begin to drift, just a little, you carry with you more than trivia and Gothic charm. You carry echoes. Of places never real. Of people long gone. Of dreams built out of stone just to be broken. On purpose. So go ahead. Sink deeper into the cushions. Let your breath slow. Let the night carry you. No more broken staircases to climb. No more ghostly ruins to explore. Only sleep now. Sleep, and the sound of ivy climbing. Sleep, and the memory of moonlight on stone. Sleep, while the garden gates close softly behind you.